Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez locked eyes with the president, launching a carefully engineered insult to dominate the news cycle, but she was entirely unprepared for the devastating trap about to snap shut over her own hometown. She delivered the exact line she had polished for the broadcasting cameras, the live audience, and the waiting social media algorithms. She declared that while both were products of Queens, only one had actually inhabited its reality, while the other was shielded behind his father's wrought iron gates, insulated by vast wealth and geographical distance. The auditorium exploded because the phrase was a masterclass in virality. Delivered with the radiant confidence of a politician who assumed victory was already secured. Digital shares multiplied in the thousands before she even leaned back into her seat, and for a few suspended heartbeats, she owned the room completely. Then, Donald Trump let out a laugh. It wasn't the tight, defensive chuckle of a cornered official trying to deflect a blow. It was the loose, genuine laughter of an opponent who recognized a fatal tactical error and welcomed the opening. That single sound instantly shifted the room's climate, because it starved her of the defensive reaction her strategy required. And without that visible wound, her carefully crafted insult began to wither. Performative political strikes rely entirely on seeing the target bleed a frantic interruption, a stuttered excuse, or any acknowledgement that the attacker's premise is valid. Trump rejected the premise entirely and treated her viral soundbite as a wide-open door to compare their actual records, their command of the facts, and their tangible results right on the very turf she had selected. He fired back. "Two kids from Queens, she's right. But only one of the two knows the crime rate in Queens right now, and it's not her." In a single breath, the confrontation was no longer a debate about wealthy chauffeurs and weaponized class resentment. It morphed into a brutal, real-time audit of whether the congresswoman who had wrapped her entire political identity in Queens actually understood her district. The sting of this reversal was magnified because this wasn't some sterile Washington committee room where a glaring lack of knowledge could be hidden behind parliamentary rules. This was Queens itself, meticulously dressed up with floral displays, fresh carpeting, blinding television lights, and the manufactured warmth of a convention center imitating a neighborhood gathering. Ocasio-Cortez had set the stage by invoking the Q44 bus line, the neighborhood bodegas, the roaring elevated trains, and the jammed apartment windows every specific image deployed to establish an unshakable intimacy that Trump's money could supposedly never acquire. She played the part of the gritty bartender turned lawmaker, leaning aggressively forward, substituting constant physical motion for genuine authenticity. But Trump didn't bother attacking her childhood memories. He aimed directly at her statistics. And no amount of nostalgic memory can save a politician who is ignorant of the numbers. She had explicitly cited Jamaica estates, the private driveways, the security details, and the wealthy patriarch whose fortune allegedly kept Trump entirely severed from the borough. She sternly warned him against lecturing her about Queens, insisting that in her narrative he had only observed it through tinted glass, whereas she had survived its daily reality. The crowd had initially rewarded the performance, cheering for what sounded like righteous class vengeance wrapped in fierce local pride, and for a fleeting second, it felt perfect. Yet Trump refused to apologize for the fence. He didn't fake a humble upbringing, and he made no effort to defend the extreme privileges everyone already knew he possessed. Instead, he coolly pointed out that his father had physically constructed thousands of residential apartments for working families, leaving behind actual buildings, working doors, and metal keys all across Queens. He then forced the silent room to weigh that physical legacy against her expanding collection of fiery speeches, viral posts, and campaign slogans. That sharp pivot moved the entire debate away from personal biography and squarely onto actual production, from the starting line of their lives to what they had genuinely built. He grounded his family's history in concrete terms, then systematically dismantled her political record with 5 words: one built, one posted. The laughter rippled through the crowd, starting with the unaligned voters and bleeding straight into the rows that had just been celebrating her opening attack moments earlier. Her base had loudly applauded her setup, but that setup had now been completely hijacked, demonstrating how rapidly a viral win collapses when the intended victim refuses to play the wounded man. She had gambled everything on making privilege the entire case, but Trump redirected the spotlight onto her output, her responsibility, and whether her massive national fame had yielded a single practical benefit that Queens could actually use. Trump produced a printed document, stepping onto a battlefield she had failed to prepare for, where theatrical performance becomes vulnerable because raw numbers are immune to political branding. He declared that crime in her specific district had skyrocketed by 70% since she took office, directly crediting FBI reporting and openly challenging her to verify the statistic that very night. Whether the room loved or loathed him was suddenly irrelevant compared to the fact that he had permanently attached a highly specific number to a specific district under a representative. Then he asked, "Congresswoman, what's the crime rate in your district right now?" The question was brief, direct, and impossible to bury beneath another soaring monologue because it demanded cold knowledge, not manufactured outrage, identity, or another story about riding the bus before dawn. AOC opened her mouth, stopped, tried again, and visibly scrambled for an answer that should not have required searching. The silence became infinitely more damaging because the question centered on the very district she invoked constantly as evidence of her authenticity. She had arrived fully prepared to explain Queens to Trump, yet she could not state the number he had just placed before millions of viewers. The failure did not look technical. It looked like a representative discovering on live television that she knew the language of the district far better than its actual condition. People in the gallery didn't need to support Trump to process the glaring difference between a politician who speaks about them and one who actually knows what is happening to them. A woman wearing a diner uniform shifted forward, not clapping, not laughing, simply watching as unbreakable confidence melted into undeniable doubt. That reaction carried vastly more weight than partisan applause, because doubt shatters political allegiance long before anger does, and it cannot be redirected toward another enemy. Trump repeated the 70% figure and connected it directly to AOC's tenure, forcing the room to compare her aggressive certainty with her total factual emptiness. She had mocked the fence to prove Trump did not know Queens, but within minutes, the man behind it appeared to know her district better than its own representative. As Trump prepared to move from Queens to Munich, from the crime rate she could not name to the foreign policy answer she could not complete, the audience understood that her opening strike hadn't wounded him at all. It had simply handed him the map. Trump shifted to Munich without giving the room a single second to reset, making it clear that the weakness he exposed was not limited to one missing statistic. He brought up the February Security Conference and the critical question AOC received regarding whether America should defend Taiwan if China invaded. Every serious national figure should have considered that issue before stepping onto an international stage. Yet her answer dissolved into hesitations and abandoned clauses. Trump didn't paraphrase it, exaggerate it, or hide behind interpretation. He read the transcript exactly as she had delivered it. Accuracy was far more punishing than mockery, because it eliminated any escape route except denying her own recorded words. He highlighted the ums, the vague references to long-standing policy, and the verbal searching that revealed how little command stood behind the confidence. 7 stumbles in 40 seconds becomes more than nervousness when the topic involves China, Taiwan, American troops, and possible war. AOC tried to dismiss the embarrassment as sarcasm, but sarcasm about basic competence does not become sophisticated just because it is posted afterward. Trump reminded the room that she had publicly labeled herself a silly girl after appearing before world leaders who were measuring American seriousness. He noted that they believed her, and that word landed harder than another insult because it permanently converted her joke into international judgment. AOC's posture changed in microscopic details. The cameras caught, while she tried to maintain a face of resistance. Her hand tightened against the chair, her chin dropped slightly, and the energy behind her opening attack looked increasingly manufactured. The room had watched her claim superior knowledge of Queens, only to fail at naming the crime rate in her district. Now it heard a second example of certainty collapsing, when a basic question required a direct answer instead of performance. What looked like one bad moment was rapidly solidifying into a pattern of ambition moving faster than preparation. Trump then shifted from competence to hypocrisy, selecting the very subject AOC used against everyone else: wealth, privilege, and elite excess. He cited her February 2025 claim that she commuted to Washington by rail or commercial flight to maintain her image. He then juxtaposed that claim beside her April appearance in Bakersfield, where she stepped from a Bombardier Challenger private jet during the Fight Oligarchy tour. The aircraft cost $15,000 an hour, making the slogan sound less like a core principle and more like satire. Trump casually noted he had flown privately for years, but at least he never renamed luxury as resistance. The laughter landed because the evidence was inside the joke and could not be separated. Fight Oligarchy from a private jet summarized the contradiction without requiring a speech, an investigation, or partisan interpretation. Trump wasn't claiming every private flight proved corruption. He was exposing the hypocrisy of condemning elite indulgence while actively choosing it. He called private flying Tuesday because he never pretended to live like an ordinary commuter carrying a suitcase through Penn Station. AOC's brand required the audience to ignore what they could plainly see, and the room was no longer willing to cooperate. Trump continued by listing $53,500 in campaign-funded luxury hotels and a reported $3,500 night at the Vidara in Las Vegas. He knew the property, he understood the market, and he knew exactly what that price tag represented because luxury hotels were his native business language. That rate did not resemble sacrifice by a working-class advocate. It mirrored the habits of the exact people she attacked. The room laughed when Trump noted that oligarchs stayed at the Vidara right along with congresswomen who claimed to be fighting them. Again, the punchline worked because the financial record had written it before he even spoke. Then came the staff email demanding nothing below 4 stars, a detail exposing a deep expectation rather than an isolated travel decision. One expensive room can be blamed on security, scheduling, availability, or convenience. A written standard for 4-star accommodations proves that luxury had become the rule, not the exception. Trump focused on thread count, drawing on decades in the hotel business to explain precisely what kind of customer makes that demand. The bartender identity suddenly looked less like current reality and more like an old costume preserved solely for campaign appearances. His argument was not that someone who once worked a service job must remain uncomfortable forever. It was that AOC used working-class hardship as a moral weapon while insulating herself with donor-funded standards most workers could never afford. She built authority by insisting she never forgot where she came from. Yet the record suggested she remembered the imagery much better than the habits. Queens appeared loudly in her speeches, while private jets, luxury hotels, and 4-star requirements appeared quietly in expenses and staff correspondence. The problem was not her success, it was selling luxury as solidarity and expecting the public to applaud the disguise. Trump then introduced Gloria Reyes, a bakery owner in Corona who had worked 19 years and rose at 4 every morning to make bread. Gloria represented the exact people whose labor AOC invoked whenever she needed applause, donations, or protection from scrutiny. She washed her sheets at the laundromat across the street and worried about rent, not whether hotel linens met a preferred thread count. A woman in a diner uniform nodded because she understood swollen feet, rising prices, early alarms, and the brutal arithmetic of survival. That small nod carried more judgment than partisan shouting because it came from someone who recognized the difference between representing workers and using them. By then, AOC's opening insult about Trump's father's fence had collapsed into a sequence of facts she could no longer control. The fence led to buildings. The buildings led to results. The results led to crime statistics, and Munich exposed the exact same weakness on foreign policy. The private jet, the Vadara bill, the four-star demand, and the thread count email systematically attacked the authenticity she relied upon when facts failed. Trump removed the laughter from his voice, slowed his pace, and signaled that the next subject would not concern hypocrisy alone. Gloria's donor money was about to lead the room into companies, federal filings, campaign classifications, and questions that could not be answered with another poetic speech about queens. Trump dropped the humor because campaign finance needed no theatrical fog, and he wanted every number to remain exposed. He cited $900,000 from AOC's campaign paid to Brand New Congress LLC, an entity connected to former aide Saikat Chakrabarti. Federal filings described those payments as strategic consulting, an ordinary phrase that concealed what the company reportedly performed. Chakrabarti had publicly admitted the operation handled fundraising and volunteer activity functions heavily resembling internal campaign machinery rather than outside advice. Trump's point was merciless: when reported labels do not match actual work, the issue stops being about branding and becomes severe compliance. He stressed that federal forms are not social media captions where language can redirect attention and supporters fill the gaps. Campaign reports exist to tell donors, regulators, and voters exactly where money went, why it moved, and what service was purchased. Calling operational work consulting does not become accurate just because the softer term sounds safer or because allies dislike the person questioning it. Trump cited a former FEC commissioner who stated the evidence justified civil investigation and could warrant criminal review by federal authorities. Those words carried immense weight because they came from someone who administered campaign rules, not a rival improvising accusations for applause. Trump then moved to March 2026, pulling up 3 payments, totaling $18,725 to a Dr. Brian B. in Massachusetts. The filings labeled their purpose as leadership training, a language specifically designed to sound professional, developmental, and routine inside a political organization. Trump revealed that Dr. B was a psychiatrist, not a leadership consultant, and argued that the service strongly appeared to involve therapy. That distinction mattered because donor money does not lose its legal significance when a campaign replaces one description with another. If the payments covered therapy, leadership training was misleading if they actually covered training. The campaign needed the records proving that service. Trump brought Gloria Reyes back into focus because financial abstractions become impossible to excuse when attached to the worker who earned each dollar. Gloria sent $20 from her bakery wages, genuinely believing she was supporting someone who claimed to fight for people living like her. She rose before dawn, measured ingredients, paid bills, watched her rent increase, and trusted that campaign money would finance work she understood. Part of those donations reached a psychiatrist beneath a label she would never have interpreted as therapy. Gloria did not know when she contributed, Trump noted, but after this broadcast, she understood exactly what the filing claimed and why. Across the table, AOC shot a look toward her attorney, but his pen stayed firmly on the legal pad, and his eyes stayed lowered. That refusal carried its own chilling message, because lawyers know when a televised answer can create far more exposure than a disciplined silence. Earlier, AOC had brushed counsel aside like a fighter too confident to need protection, but now she accepted his steadying hand, her posture completely inverted from confrontation to stabilization, from a politician controlling the room to a terrified client measuring each sentence. Trump did not even need to describe the fear because the cameras were already recording it between her searching eyes and her attorney's face. Then came an announcement only a sitting president could deliver, armed with the force of executive knowledge behind the words. Trump stated that the 2019 FEC complaint had ended in a 3-3 deadlock, not through a finding clearing AOC on the merits. A deadlock is not vindication, and he brutally emphasized that distinction because political statements routinely erase procedural weakness for public consumption. With a newly constituted commission, he noted that the previous barrier no longer guaranteed protection, while the March 2026 complaint remained fully active. Two complaints now confronted her, and his earlier impeachment joke only sharpened the seriousness hidden beneath the room's laughter. The gallery laughed briefly, then turned entirely silent as reporters stopped drafting commentary and began sending urgent alerts to editors and producers. Presidential confirmation of active proceedings could not be dismissed as just another insult clip, because the consequences would continue long after the cameras turned away. The facts would move through newsrooms, legal offices, donor circles, and opposition teams long after the stage lights cooled. AOC's staff could attack Trump's motives, but motive could not erase payment totals, filing categories, public admissions, or pending complaints. The spectacle she designed around his upbringing had mutated into a live inventory of her own political and legal vulnerabilities. AOC stood up because retreat would have looked worse, and she instinctively returned to the language that had carried her through previous confrontation. She spoke rapidly about the minimum wage, rent, childcare, hospital closures, failing schools, flooded subways, and the queens she claimed to serve. The speech was forceful and familiar, but it was transparently built to move past every specific issue Trump had placed before her. She attacked Jamaica estates again because class imagery was vastly safer than filings, and biography offered much more room than federal requirements. Trump simply waited until she claimed service to Queens, then cut directly through the speech with two words, crime rate. The interruption was absolutely devastating, because it returned everyone to the first unanswered question and exposed the speech as a deliberate avoidance tactic. Trump once again demanded the crime rate in the district she invoked as proof of authenticity and moral authority. 40 minutes had passed, more than enough time for staff with phones, databases, and federal access to place one number before her. Surprise was completely gone as an excuse, and confusion no longer looked temporary or forgivable. Either she still genuinely did not know, or she knew and understood that saying it aloud would permanently confirm the increase Trump had tied directly to her tenure. AOC gave no number, and the second silence was worse because it transformed an initial lapse into a final verdict on preparation. Trump mercilessly repeated the 70% increase and contrasted his knowledge from Mar-a-Lago with her glaring ignorance while representing Queens. He stated the borough needed hard numbers, not clapbacks, reducing her political style to the exact weapon that had opened the evening and permanently trapping her inside it. The gallery stopped behaving like an audience and started weighing the moment like a jury. Hearing the exact same question twice as AOC stood without an answer, Trump prepared to abandon every joke and tell her exactly what Queens now required from her. Trump dropped the showmanship completely, and the missing grin changed the room far more than another punchline could have. He spoke not as the president performing for cameras, but as one child of Queens addressing another about a borough both claimed to understand. He acknowledged AOC's undeniable talent, her ability to fill rooms, move people, raise money, and make supporters believe change was possible. Then he asked what that generational talent had actually produced. Beyond Instagram, TikTok, Munich, private jets, luxury hotels, and managed symbolism. The question was brutal because it measured enormous influence against a total lack of results and exposed how visibility had delivered so little. Trump returned to Queens and placed his father's record right beside AOC's brand buildings against slogans, doors against clips, keys against applause. He proudly admitted the fence because denial would have weakened him, then argued that Fred Trump created apartments where working families actually lived and raised children. AOC had spent years turning the fence into evidence of moral distance, but Trump inverted it into a comparison she could not escape. His father, he said, built infinitely more for Queens from behind that fence than she had built in front of every camera. The room had already watched her fail twice on her district's basic number. Then Trump said, "Go home, Congresswoman," and immediately made clear he was not repeating the old "send her back" slogan. He meant Queens, not exile, and told her to return without a photo opportunity, staged event, campaign crew, or prepared speech. He ordered her to learn the crime rate, the rent, glorious name, and exactly what 4 inches the morning looked like inside a Corona bakery. His voice became plain, almost private, stripping the exchange of spectacle and leaving only a raw accusation of distance. Queens needed her, he said, but only if she returned and learned the place far beyond her empty national slogans. The room did not applaud because applause would have cheapened what had happened, and everyone seemed to recognize that instinctively. Instead, the audience exhaled with the heavy stillness of people who had stopped watching a contest and started forming a judgment. A woman in the 4th row wiped her eyes not for Trump and not for AOC, but for the borough reduced to numbers no one could soften. Her tears belonged to the bus, the laundromat, the bakery, the rent notice, and the workers who understood survival much more intimately than thread count. That reaction carried no party label, which made it incredibly politically dangerous for AOC. The moderator gently invited AOC to deliver a closing statement, and she stood because silence would have looked like unconditional surrender. She spoke passionately about her mother, the Bronx, working families, justice, and the values that had built her career. The words were familiar, polished, emotionally correct, and completely disconnected from the specific questions the evening had forced open. She did not mention the crime rate, Munich, the FEC complaints, the psychiatrist, the private jet, the hotels, or the filing labels. After 90 minutes of brutal numbers, a speech about values sounded exactly like what politicians use when facts become too dangerous to address directly. Trump remained seated and did not add another shot, which, from him, was far more striking than another attack could have been. He had finished. He knew he had finished. And he allowed the silence to carry what repetition would only weaken. Behind the stage, AOC's communications director stared at a prepared statement about confronting Trump's privileged upbringing and realized it answered the wrong event. The town hall had begun with his fence but ended with her district, her spending, her preparation, and her record. He deleted the statement because no language about motive could ever erase what 11 million people had just watched unfold live. The first clip to explode online was the fence exchange, AOC's insult, Trump's laugh, and the pivot from biography to results. It reached tens of millions because the laugh completely neutralized the attack before the insult could harden into the victory she expected. The second clip showed Trump asking for the crime rate twice, 40 minutes apart, while AOC failed both times to provide it. Viewers shared it not as partisan theater, but as an objective competence test for someone representing a district she invoked. The third clip lasted longer because "go home" sounded like harsh advice, not expulsion, and came completely unexpectedly. AOC's office later described the event as a spectacle meant to distract from failures on housing, healthcare, and immigration. The statement furiously attacked the reason for the confrontation while refusing to address a single piece of evidence produced during it. It did not answer the crime question, the Munich transcript, the travel expenses, the 4-star standard, or the campaign finance complaints. The FEC confirmed through ordinary procedural channels that the complaints remained under active review, making avoidance impossible to sustain. The issue had moved well beyond one television night and into severe legal, political, and donor consequences that no communications memo could ever simply outlast. Silly girl became quick shorthand for unpreparedness disguised as irony, and rivals began using the phrase without naming its source. A supplemental complaint cited the glaring contradictions between her claims and campaign spending, explicitly using the town hall footage as a map of weaknesses. In Corona, a local challenger held a church basement meeting and opened by saying she knew the exact crime rate, the rent, and the price of eggs. The sentence was not elegant or viral, but it contained the one crucial thing AOC had failed to provide on the stage. Available to just 30 people, asking whether their representative still knew them was the quiet beginning of something new. At 4 inches the morning, Gloria Reyes unlocked her bakery and began the work she had performed for 19 years. She had watched the go-home clip repeatedly, not because she supported Trump, but because she recognized the cold truth inside the instruction. Gloria knew the cost of flour, rent, gas, labor, and the $20 donations she sent with faith in someone fighting for her. She mixed the water, salt, yeast, and flour, while Queens remained exactly where it had always been, waiting for representation that actually knew its numbers and its people. 2 kids from Queens had taken the stage, but only one had come home.